friends, I'm Brooke.
And I'm Cami.
Welcome to Bookish Realms. Today's episode kicks off our Throne of Glass series deep dive, starting with chapters 8 through 15. For this episode, the chapter summaries and character discussion are spoiler-free, but the rest of the pod does include spoilers for all of Throne of Glass. This podcast is for mature audiences only. Let's get into it.
Chapter summaries. As a reminder, this is a non-spoiler section, so if you haven't finished Throne of Glass, you can listen to this section. Chapter 8. Kale is giving Selena a tour of the castle, but she refuses to enter the glass portion. She uses this tour to plot possible escape routes. During this tour, she notices the clock tower, the gargoyles, and a raised tile with a strange mark on it. Selena is unsettled by these things, but Kale keeps walking until they reach the library, which has over 1 million books. Selena wants to read the books, but they belong to the king. This kicks off Selena and Dorian's pen pal era. Chapter 9. Philippa is helping Selena get dressed. Kale enters and whisks Selena off to meet the king, which she was not prepared for. He gives her some instructions on how to behave, but Selena is terrified. Chapter 10. Selena finds herself in a room fit for a queen. Or a nightmare. The red marble floor glows under the light of chandeliers and torches, and the fire has a greenish tinge that puts her on edge. She bows before the king, her legs trembling. Kale guides her to stand by Dorian as the king begins to announce the start of the competition to be his champion. Selena sizes up the 23 other competitors, determined to survive the next 13 weeks. One thought anchors her. She must win to gain her freedom. After being dismissed by the king, Selena is introduced to Lady Caltaine Rompier by Dorian. He introduces her as Lady Lillian Gordana. Caltaine is curious about Selena, but generally treats her with disdain. Chapter 11. Waking up is tough, but waking up to Kale ripping the covers off is just cruel. He rushes her along, barely letting her have breakfast before they head off to the competition. Selena doesn't let her nerves show, even though she was up late reading books, courtesy of Dorian's personal library. Selena is sarcastic and witty as they train, but Kale just seems to find her irritating. Selena enters the training hall, which is filled with weapons and the other competitors. Selena picks up a sword and internally sizes up her opponents. Kane, who is huge and full of himself, tries to provoke her. Kale steps in and spars with her. Surprisingly, Kale puts up a good fight and ends up winning. Selena's pissed and vows her revenge. Seems like they'll only get along when they're literally fighting it out. As they gear up for another round, Selena picks up a set of hunting knives and lets out a wicked smile. The fun is just beginning. Chapter 12. Selena is about to hurl the hunting knives at Kale when a loud voice stops her. Enter Brillo, the castle's weapons master and the judge of the king's competition. Brillo means business. He's trained knights, lords, and possibly even Kale himself. Impressing Brillo will be difficult. Brillo kicks off a community builder, and everyone starts introducing themselves and sharing their favorite color. Just kidding. Kane, a soldier from the White Fang Mountains, starts off. His introduction is followed by the rest of the competitors, who are all different shades of questionable. From the slimy master thief to the eye-gobbling murderer, seriously, who eats eyes? Selena, hiding behind the alias Lillian Gordana, claims to be a jewel thief. Brillo's got them running laps. Upon Kale's request to play the part of the underdog, Selena keeps to the middle. Kane sprints ahead like he's got Heelys on. She finishes the race and walks away to find her lost ring, though it was really just an excuse to puke her guts out without anyone seeing her. Don't worry, girl. We've all had to run the mile back in school. Chapter 13. Selena's having lunch with Kale. At first, the conversation is surface level. Selena hates salmon and the smell of fish. However, the hours begin to pass quickly as they talk about their mutual love for literature and books. They end up talking for hours, and before she knows it, Kale is headed off to rest, leaving Selena to read the rest of the afternoon. The next morning, Selena is caught mid-workout by Kale, who is both impressed and slightly thrown off. Later, she's dressed to the nines in a lilac silk gown, only to run into the stunning Princess Nehemia of Eelway, who is accompanied by her guards. Caltaine Rompier, ever the thorn in Selena's side, introduces Nehemia. Surprise! Selena knows Eelway and quickly begins chatting up Nehemia. They warm up to each other and bond over their shared disdain of the Otterlanian court. Nehemia makes it clear that she's not a fan of Caltaine, so Selena dismisses her. Nehemia asks Selena to accompany her during her stay. Selena eagerly agrees, secretly wondering if they'll become friends. Chapter 14. Selena begins training in her room using any item she can to exercise. Kale joins her for breakfast and then they take a run through the park. She also trains in a private room until she complains from fatigue and hunger. She's settling into a routine and seems more comfortable with Kale. During her training, Selena prefers knives and a wooden staff. Things take a turn before the first day, when Kale doesn't show for breakfast or for their run. Noticing the extra guards in the training hall, she meets Knox Owen. He shares that Bill Chastain, the Eye Eater, was found dead, his body in ribbons. The other champions are unsettled, and there's a lot of nervous energy in the air. In the training hall, Selena practices throwing knives and helps Knox improve his technique. He's impressed by her abilities. Later on, Kale visits Selena. They fall into a conversation about his background, how he gave up his title and became captain of the guard. Selena shares that her parents died when she was 8 years old. She also shares a traumatic experience from her training with Arabin Hamill. Chapter 15.
15.
Okay. Chapter 15. It's time for Selena's first test, and she really doesn't know what to expect. She walks into the sparring room alongside Kale. A black curtain separates the room, hiding one half from view. There's a nervous energy amongst the competitors. The test is an archery contest where each competitor gets 5 shots at 5 targets, and the one with the worst aim will be eliminated. Selena's relieved, as her assassin's training definitely gives her an advantage. Kane, who is quickly becoming Selena's #1 enemy, hits 5 bullseyes. When it's Selena's turn, she hits the targets, but avoids the bullseyes so she doesn't draw too much attention. However, our girl can't help herself. On the final shot, she hits the absolute center of the target. Despite doing well, Selena feels dissatisfied. This is just the beginning. There's a long road ahead, and she has to stay focused on winning her freedom.
Character discussion. Here, we'll cover what we've learned about each main character and track their character development. This section is also spoiler-free. Let's start with our main characters. Selena Sardothian, aka Lillian Gordania. Dorian creates a whole backstory and really uses his imagination here. Your name is Lillian Gordania. Your mother is dead, and your father is a wealthy merchant from Belhaven. You are the sole heir to his fortune. However, you have a dark secret. You spend your nights as a jewel thief. I met you this summer after you tried to rob me while I was vacationing in Belhaven, and I saw your potential then. But your father discovered your nightly fun and removed you from the lure of the city to a town near Endovier. When my father decided to have this competition, I journeyed to find you and brought you here as my champion. You can fill in the gaps yourself. I think it's actually so funny how he just took the time to create this long, elaborate backstory for his champion. Like, period, as he should. Nehemia, our princess of Iwe, the light of Iwe. She is known to be beautiful, brave, and a force to be reckoned with. She's visiting Rifthold for political reasons, but it's really because she stands to be a threat to the king of Otterland when she takes the throne. She's rumored to be a slave sympathizer and rebel who works to smuggle information and supplies to rebel groups in Iwe. Kale. Our boy is finally opening up. Just a little bit, though. He's still a man of many mysteries. We learn more about him and Dorian's friendship. They have become friends because they were the only boys in the castle of high rank. They did everything together. Lessons, training, and playing. They were separated when Kale was 13 and his father moved back to Enel. Kale was supposed to join the royal council and follow in his father's footsteps. But Kale missed Rifthold and his boy bestie, Dorian. But Dorian was able to convince Brillo, right? How do you say that? Brillo?
It's like Brillo pad, but with a U.
Okay. But Dorian was able to convince Brillo, the captain of the guard, to take Kale under his wing. So Kale dipped out and gave up his title and left the next day to reunite with Dorian. The bromance is real. Kane, the biggest, buffest dude around. He's from the White Fang Mountains. The people from there are known to be brutal and fierce. Kane is Parrington's champion. He's not ugly, but something's definitely off with him. Maybe it's his obsidian eyes. Next are side characters, Queen Georgina and Holland. Queen Georgina is Dorian's mom. We don't learn much about her other than that she's very protective of Holland, who is Dorian's younger brother. Holland is painted as a rotten and spoiled 10-year-old who beat one of his servants over burnt porridge. He was sent away to school in the mountains because of this incident. Caltaine Rampier. We are introduced to Caltaine, but we don't get a big info dump on her in these chapters. Her father is rich AF, and Parrington is chasing her tail. Caltaine gives off pygmy vibes right off the bat and seems to want Dorian's attention.
World building. Let's explore this world. Here we cover the main world building elements that come up in chapters 8 through 15. We'll revisit these places and world building elements in other episodes. This section is spoiler free. There are 2 libraries mentioned in this section. We'll have a whole Massverse episodes on libraries in the future, but this section will serve as an intro to the Castle's Library and the Great Library of Orinth. Castle's Library. We step into the Castle's Library, which Celaena describes as a city made entirely of paper. That's a dream. It's huge, with black and white marble floors, large mahogany tables with red velvet chairs, and a cozy fire. And books. So many books. Celaena shifts her focus from escape routes to the books around them. When she asks Cale how many there are, he shrugs and says the last time they were counted, which was 200 years ago, there were 1 million books. And that's before you consider the whispers of an even greater collection hidden deep in the catacombs below. Celaena is spellbound by the library, our book talk queen. Great Library of Orinth. As they walk around the castle's library, Cale brings up the Great Library of Orinth, which is in Terrasen, where Celaena is from. The Great Library of Orinth was twice the size of the castle's library, and it was said to hold all the knowledge in the world. Celaena's last visit seems like a lifetime ago, and she can't help but think of all the books and knowledge that has been lost. But she holds a small hope that the master scholars had somehow smuggled the books away to safety, after the royal family had been slaughtered and the king took over. She hopes that the knowledge remains safe somewhere, far away from the king's tyranny.
Next in world building is the clock tower. The clock tower is made of black stone. It's a strange addition to the garden and definitely stands out. Roaring gargoyles with outstretched wings decorate the clock. Even Cale agrees that the clock tower gives off bad vibes and shares that he wouldn't go near it as a child. The king had it built around Dorian's birth, which was over 20 years ago. We'll get more into it in our foreshadowing and analysis section. Welcome to our analysis and foreshadowing section for Throne of Glass. Just a heads up, this is not spoiler free. We will be breaking down parts of the text that tie into or foreshadow future events in the series.
That's right. If you haven't read all of Throne of Glass, you might want to skip this part. We've divided this section into 3 parts: Celaena's past, Celaena's future, and our villains, the Valg.
Let's kick things off with Celaena's past. I've got a quote here that really sets the tone. She never had many friends, and the ones she had often disappointed her, sometimes with devastating consequences, as she'd learned that summer with the silent assassins of the Red Desert. After that, she'd sworn never to trust girls again, especially girls with agendas and power of their own, girls who would do anything to get what they wanted.
Our poor girl, she just never had many friends.
Man, her first true friend, Ansel of Briarcliff, and she fucked Celaena over and literally tried to kill her.
But also, in a way, Celaena is exactly the girl she describes. She has her own agendas, whether it's to be free or to free Aurelia, and she has power of her own. She goes to extremes, like sacrificing herself, to get what she wants.
Yeah, that is true. And her close friends and allies end up being girls like this too, such as Lysandra, Nehemia, Manon, and Caltaine. Could all be described like this as well. They're all cut from the same cloth.
Celaena found her girlies after all. Okay, what's our next foreshadowing moment?
This one's from chapter 14. Though she'd never been to Paranth, Terrasen's second largest city, the mention of her homeland still spiked a bolt of fear and guilt. It had been 10 years since the royal family had been butchered, 10 years since the king of Otterland had marched his army in, 10 years since Terrasen met its doom with bowed heads and silence. She shouldn't have mentioned it. She didn't know why she mentioned it, actually.
Ugh, this is so sad, because it was her family that was butchered.
Imagine thinking of home and feeling fear and guilt instead of having happy memories.
She also says she didn't know why she mentioned it, actually. Celaena's always subconsciously thinking of home, the things that happened there and how they shaped her. It's like her past is always there, just below the surface. Speaking of which, here's a quote about Cain from chapter 12. What would his fellow mountain dwellers say if they could see him now? She gritted her teeth. What would the people of Terrasen say if they could see her now?
Celaena is literally haunted by her people and what they would think of her. An assassin, a slave, and now a competitor to be King's champion.
She also wonders how Cain lives with that.
She's always got Terrasen in the back of her brain, like a queen should.
The foreshadowing. All right, let's move on to Celaena's future. What was that quote from chapter 13?
It goes, perhaps he knew, the king, what sort of threat Nehemia posed, but why bring her to the castle?
Well, our girl does get murdered.
R.I.P.
R.I.P. R.I.P. Oh, I miss her.
We love her.
Nehemia's presence and death really kick Celaena into action.
So, in the end, she does end up being a huge threat to the king.
She really connects Celaena not just to Elena, but also to her prophecy.
Without our good sis Nehemia, we wouldn't have got to meet our queen, the icon herself, Aelin Ashriver Galanthinius Whitethorn.
Woo!
Period.
And all of that is directly related to the king's downfall.
Fuck the king. Speaking of the king, let's talk about that clock tower. As we mentioned in our world building section, it's made of black stone, which we eventually learn is wordstone.
The king has it built around Dorian's birth, which was around or like over 20 years ago. This suggests that the king's plan had been in place for much longer than when magic actually disappeared. Timeline-wise, it also lets us know that the king's been valged up for decades.
We eventually learned that there are three cocks.
Three stone cocks.
We eventually learned that there are 3 clock towers in total, and they were used by the king to make magic disappear altogether. Destroying the clock tower returns magic to Aurelia and catapults us into our next set of events.
So, what other sneaky hints has SJM hidden for us?
Hold on to your bookmarks, people. Here's a juicy bit from Chapter 8. The last time anyone bothered to count the books, it was 1,000,000, but that was 200 years ago. I'd say maybe more than that, especially given the legends that a second library lies deep beneath, in catacombs and tunnels.
This foreshadows so much. It foreshadows Celaena finding Elena's tomb, Damaris, the Eye of Elena, the catacombs, and all the other secrets hidden beneath the castle.
Girl, don't forget about Mort. I love me some Mort.
Who doesn't love that sassy door knocker?
Here's another quote from Chapter 8. A dead, empty space opened inside her. Needing to change the subject, she asked, "Why are none of your folks here? Guards are of no use in the library." Oh, how wrong he was. Libraries were full of ideas, perhaps the most dangerous and powerful of all weapons.
I love this quote. But also, Celaena finds the Walking Dead in a library, and it basically follows her around.
Yeah, that's true. She also finds the second path at the back of the library, which leads her to that prison that's like basically hidden underneath the castle.
Libraries in general hold a lot of mysterious information, which we'll delve into in a Massverse episode.
Period. Now, let's switch gears a bit and look at things from Kael's perspective. Here's a quote from Chapter 13. Despite her arrogance, she was clever and relatively kind and somewhat charming. But where was that writhing darkness? Why didn't it show itself so he could just throw her into the dungeon and call off this ridiculous competition? There was something great and deadly concealed within her, and he didn't like it. He'd be ready. When the time came, he'd be waiting. He just wondered which one of them would survive.
Okay, well, you end up falling in love with her, Kael, so...
And there's something great and deadly inside of her. Hello, she's a fire-breathing bitch queen.
She ends up being the one person who could bring down the king, who at this point, Kael does faithfully serve.
When he does meet that something great and deadly inside of her, aka Aelin, he struggles with this a lot.
The time does come, as Kael mentions, but he ends up on the other side, working hand in hand with Aelin to help bring down the Valg. I think the Kael in this chapter would find that almost impossible to believe.
I agree. And Kael wonders which one of them would survive, while Aelin and Kael both live at the end of Kingdom of Ash. The Celaena he knows is dead.
She loses her ability to shift into her human form, keeping her in the Fae form. For a while, Kael struggles to let human Celaena go and accept Aelin, the Queen of Terrasen. He struggles to shift his moral compass and see that Celaena/Aelin is a symbol of a better world. Super quick editing note here. If this part sounds familiar to you, it's because it is. I was so eager to talk about this that I accidentally included it in episode 1, even though it happens in chapter 8. Whoops, I'm including it here for the sake of continuity. Not to go backwards, but here's a quote that really threw me for a loop in chapter 8. And maybe I'm just not remembering or not understanding the context of this. But Kael and Celaena are outside in the garden. They're looking at the gargoyles. The quote says, "You'd see something like this before the gates of Word, not in a garden." What is this? I know what a word gate is, what a word stone is, what a word key is, but I just don't remember this specific phrasing coming up again. Gates of word, it's reminiscent of gates of hell, gates of heaven.
Or is it some sort of hint to the word gates Selena/Aelin will open eventually?
I don't know, but it really stood out to me on this reread, and it's something I'm going to keep track of as we keep rereading.
For sure, girl. All right, let's wrap this up with some Valg talk. In chapter 10, when describing Cain, Selena says, "It wasn't that he was ugly. In fact, his tanned face was rather pleasant, but there was something nasty about his demeanor, about his obsidian eyes as they shifted and met her own."
Valg alert, Valg alert. You can bet any time you see black eyes or a black ring, there's a Valg inside that person. They're like the body snatchers of this world.
We never really got to know the real Cain as he was possessed by the Valg and used to kill off the competition.
R.I.P., I guess.
Yeah.
Poor Cain never stood a chance. And let's not forget about the spooky Ritterak. We get some foreshadowing about what this Valg creature can do in chapter 13. Quote, not to mention the fact that a few of the royal hounds had gone missing, only to have their half-eaten remains found in the northern wing of the palace. That was worrisome. Who would do such a gruesome thing?
Not the puppies.
We both have dogs, so... But yeah, they should all be worried. Eating dogs is tame compared to what the Valg end up doing later on.
All right, seriously, one last bit of foreshadowing about the King of Adarlan. Quote, before departing this morning, the king hadn't taken any of the guards he'd suggested he bring on his journey, and refused to say where he was going or to accept his offer of accompaniment.
The king is off doing bad Valg shit.
Or maybe he's meeting with the witches to create the witch towers.
Ooh, regardless, he doesn't want people to know what he's up to.
And lastly, our favorite quotes. These are moments in these chapters that we really just loved. We just love to see Selena's personality. Quote, Selena made a disgusted face, her nose crinkling. You don't care for salmon? I hate fish. I'd rather die than eat it. That's surprising, he said, taking a bite. Why? Because you smell like one. She opened her mouth to expose the ball of bread and beef that she was chewing. We love our sassy queen. I think it's also just super funny that Cale is starting to open up and not act like he has a stick shoved up his ass.
My favorite moment is also our girl being sassy. Selena's on her balcony, listening to the conversation happening below. The ladies in waiting are talking shit about Selena because they all want to get in Dorian's pants.
Ooh.
I mean, like us too, but
Yeah.
they see her as a threat and call her a harlot. Selena doesn't take it, though, and literally shoves a flower plant off the balcony. It misses, and she says, this time, the ladies all scream and their skirts are ruined. This moment ends with, quote, the woman hurried off as the princess harlot strode into her chambers and called for her servants to dress her in the finest gown they could find. Selena will not tolerate anyone's shit, even after all she's been through. And also, she's like, you want to see a harlot? Let me find a gown real quick.
Slay queen. And that wraps up our deep dive into chapters 8 through 15 of Throne of Glass. We hope you enjoyed our analysis and theories. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok, where our handle is @BookishRealmsPod.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on these chapters, so drop us a comment or send us a message. Also, leave us a rating if you liked what you heard. It really helps us out.
Join us in 2 weeks when we'll be discussing chapters 16 through 24. Until then, keep reading, Assassins.
Bye!